אז היי, היום נמצאת איתי מרגו פז, הבעלים ומנכ"לית גלובלייז, שמתעסקת בהבדלים בין תרבותיים, מרצה ומעבירה סדנאות בעיקר בארגונים. אותי באופן אישי על נושא מאוד מאוד ריתק, וחשבתי שזו הזדמנות מצוינת להשמיע גם לכם קצת מהתוכן הזה. אני בטוחה שיהיה לנו הרבה חדש ומרתק. דרך אגב, אנחנו הולכים לעשות את הרעיון בעברית ואנגלית, כי פשוט ככה אנחנו נשמעות יותר טוב. אנחנו מבינות מעולה אחת את השנייה, אבל נשמעות נהדר בשפת האם. אז היי מרגו.
היי רויטל.
מה שלומך?
בסדר גמור. Thank you for the invitation to be here.
איזה כיף, אני שמחה מאוד. באמת מהיום הראשון שפגשתי אתכם זה ריתק אותי, וכל פעם חיפשתי הזדמנות רק לשמוע עוד. אז היום זו הזדמנות, אז ספרי לנו קצת מה אתם עושים ואיך זה התחיל.
Okay. It is a very, very fascinating subject. Basically, I'm an anthropologist by profession. I first started working when I made Aliyah to Israel. I first started working at Amdocs, where I was employed by them to build a language school for them. At its height, it was the biggest language school in Israel, and it was inside Amdocs. And slowly I began to understand that understanding another person's language and understanding their culture is very, very different. Because there were Israelis in our classes speaking beautiful English, but they had no idea why the Americans behave the way they do. Or we had French classes as well, and who can understand the French? So I began to speak to the top management there about introducing parallel to the language school to introduce a unit dedicated to culture, which they went for. It was the only company in Israel and one of the few companies in the world that had inside their company a unit dedicated to culture. We were 6 people in the team. We came from all over the world. And we trained our people to work, to relocate to over 30 different cultures of the world. And one of the great privileges we were given is we were sent all over the world to train other people to work with Israelis. Okay. It really, really was. I personally, about 12 years ago, no, almost 13 years ago, I left Amdocs and I founded the company Globalize. And we are a team of 5 people. And we basically travel the world teaching people of different cultures how to work with each other from the cultural perspective.
נשמע חלום של כל עסק.
It is, very fascinating and very exciting, but after 25 years, it can also be very tiring. And one of the things that have happened is that our training has become very multilateral. Once we would teach the Israelis about the Chinese, and then we would teach the Chinese about the Israelis. But today, we have Chinese customers who want to learn about how to work with Americans, or they want to learn how to be global managers, how to manage a global team. So it's very, very multilateral today, and we basically have customers all over the world. It's absolutely fascinating.
לגמרי,
absolutely fascinating.
עם מי באופן אישי את אוהבת לעבוד במיוחד?
Which culture do you mean? I think India is my favorite, other than Israeli. Okay, I think India and maybe China are my favorites because they're very, very warm people, and they're very, very what we call in our profession, they're very relationship-based people. So they're warm and they're hospitable and they take you out and they go shopping with you and they etc. So I love to work with those very, very warm cultures.
ואיפה באמת היום רוב העסקאות מתבצעות? כלומר, אם זה לקוח ישראלי שמזמין אותך, עם מי בעיקר היום אנחנו עושים קשרים?
Our most favorite is still the United States. And here I'd like to just add in that one of the biggest demands is for the United States. And the reason is that we as Israelis believe that we are similar to the Americans. And as a result, we make huge mistakes because we think we're similar, and that brings about a lot of misunderstandings, sometimes even chas v'chalila conflicts. The minute the Israelis understand how different we are from the Americans in our values, in our perspective of life, etc., they begin to understand. So America still remains our biggest demand, but fast China, Korea, Japan, India, the Asian market is pretty close behind that.
באמת הזכרת, אז מה הם באמת הטעויות שבדרך כלל אנחנו עושים, שאנחנו חושבים שהם מתנהגים אותו דבר?
Okay, great question. And the mistakes that we make are mainly have to do with the Israelis have a very specific concept of what it means to be professional. So one of the big issues that we talk about in our workshops, and here all over the world, is we talk about the whole concept of professionalism and what does it mean. The Israeli concept of professionalism has to do with how you do your job from the technical perspective. In other words, how creative are you? How good a problem solver are you? How quickly do you get results? All those kind of things. But many of the other cultures that we deal with, their concept of professionalism is totally different. It has to do with those skills, of course, but it also has to do with soft skills. It has to do with how you dress. It has to do with how you talk to people. It has to do with how you build relationships with people, etc., etc. So very often, other cultures will say about us that we are experts, but we are not professional. And one of the reasons is they are judging us on their perspective of professional, and their perspective of professional is very different from ours. I call it the difference between the what and the how. For Israelis, how you do the job is not very important. It's what you do that is important. And that's probably the biggest difference.
ואז יכול לקרוא מצב שאנחנו בעצם מתקשרים בצורה שהיא לא על אותו level, אפשר לומר, ועסקה יכולה להתפוצץ?
Absolutely.
באמת? יש לך דוגמאות כאלה לעסקאות ענקיות שעל חוסר הבנה התפוצצו?
Absolutely. I'll give you an example, a great example of it. The example is of a group of Israelis going to Japan for the first time to negotiate with the Japanese. They had received RFP, they had sent a proposal to the Japanese, and then the Japanese invited them to come over for their first meeting. And because they had never had cross-cultural training, they arrived early. The Israelis decided that they were going to be very professional, in their eyes, very professional. They arrived early. They asked the secretary where would the meeting take place. She guided them to the room, and the Israelis decided we're going to sit down, we're going to open our laptops, we're going to get everything ready so that when the Japanese arrive, they will think that we're very professional, that everything's ready, etc. Well, the Japanese arrived and stood at the door, and they wouldn't come in. Luckily, there was an interpreter. And she ran over to the Israelis and she said to them, they won't come in, and here are the reasons that they won't come in. The reasons were that the Israelis were sitting in the CEO and CFO's chairs, okay? Because their assumption was that you sit at the head of the table. The most important people sit at the head of the table, and okay, but in Japan, the most important people sit in the middle of the table. Okay, and at the end of the table are the least important people. We call them rent a crowd. They just brought them just to make it look like there's a lot of people. Also, the Japanese take great pleasure and importance in being your host. So they wanted to show the Israelis into the room, to invite them to sit down, etc. And the Israelis were already sitting. And they actually lost the deal.
Wow.
Now, that wasn't the only reason. There were quite a few reasons, because when they asked for feedback of why they didn't get it, cross-cultural incompatibility was one of the reasons that they didn't get it. So that was a perfect example of assuming that your culture is the way everybody does business is one of the biggest mistakes you can make, and can cost a lot in terms of losing a contract or building up bad relationships within a contract.
שאחר כך צריכים ללוות אותנו למשך כל הזמן אחר כך, וכבר התחלנו ברגל שמאל.
ממש. ממש, ממש.
מסקרן אותי, וכמה חברות מבינות, או בעצם כמה חברות לא מבינות, שזו הבעיה שלהם, ולכן לא לוקחות את העזרה הזו שצריך.
A lot.
בעיקר בישראל או בעיקר בחוץ?
I think both. Okay, I think both. If you look at who our customers are, they're kind of broken down. Obviously, only global companies or Israeli companies who are starting to go global. One of the biggest importances is for Israelis who have only been working with Israelis but are now have been acquired by an overseas company or have formed an M&A with an overseas company. Right from the very, very beginning, we try to show people that culture is playing, if you take an example of an M&A, for example, people know that they have to do their due diligence and et cetera, and they have to see how the corporate cultures are matched, and they have to try and merge the corporate cultures, but they often forget about the national cultures, okay? And always remember, Rouital, and this we express all the time, that national culture will eat corporate culture for breakfast, okay? What a person has been taught to do by his national culture will always be more important than what he's been taught to do because of his corporate culture. And so an M&A is a perfect example. So most of our, 99% of our customers are high-tech. They are either huge global companies who have long ago understood the importance of cross-cultural training, and there we've been working with companies like Intel, like HP, like Motorola, Samsung, Philips, all the huge companies. We've been working with them for many, many years because they understand the importance. And we also have companies, Israeli companies Israeli origin companies like Amdocs, like NICE, like Teva, etc., who also understand. But slowly but surely, the startups have become much, much more aware of how important it is. And then, of course, companies like Google and Facebook and all those guys, okay, have also for a long time understood the importance of these. But one of the things that it's important to mention is that we have customers from 40 people in a company to 150,000 people in a company.
Wow.
And everything in between.
מרתק, באמת מרתק. אני זוכרת שאנחנו דיברנו, ואת סיפרת לי על כל מיני הבדלים של התנהגויות של אנשים שאנחנו לא תופסים כאפשרות, כמו שסיפרתי שכשהיפנים חושבים, אז הם בעצם עוצמים את העיניים. ספרי על זה, כי אני זוכרת שזה ממש אימם אותי לדעת שיש תופעות כאלה שאנחנו לא מתרגמים נכון.
Absolutely. If you think of culture in terms of an iceberg, like קרחון, okay? At the top of the iceberg, you have the behaviors of a culture. But at the bottom of the iceberg, you have the values of the culture. Now, the values of the culture will cause certain behaviors. So the example that you gave is of the Japanese, that you can be talking to them. Let's take maybe in a negotiation session or something, and the CEO is sitting there with his eyes closed. And you think, what the hell is going on here? Okay, is he sleeping? Am I that boring? And we can learn so much from the Asians because they are incredible listeners. Okay, he is actually cutting off other stimuli in order to hear you better and to understand you better. So he's not sleeping at all. He's listening to you very, very closely, and he's listening for every word that you are saying. For the Japanese, every word has meaning. And that's why I've often warned people from the West, guys, don't say things to Japanese that you don't really mean. Because they are listening so well, they will remember things that you have long forgotten. And there's a beautiful example that we had recently. We were in Japan training the Japanese, and they brought up an example. They had been doing initial business with the Israelis, and one of the sales managers had promised that if down the line certain things happen in this project, they would get an extra discount. 2 years down the line, this particular thing happened, and they were expecting the 5% discount. And the Israeli said, but we didn't promise you that. And they said, yes, you did. And the Israeli said, who promised you that? And they gave the name of one of the salespeople that had promised. He had already left the Israeli company. Okay. They had to contact him to ask him if he had promised it. And yes, he said he had promised it. They had to give the customer.
מדהים. אז מה הם הערכים? באמת, את דיברת על זה שלתרבויות שונות יש ערכים שונים.
Yes.
מה חזק אצלנו ומה חזק נגיד אצל היפנים, סינים, אמריקאים?
Okay. Obviously, the most important of all cultural variables is in how do people communicate. So you have Chinese, Japanese, to a slightly lesser degree, Indians, who we call high context, indirect speakers. They will not tell you directly what they mean, particularly if it's something negative. So they will say yes, 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 but you have to understand the context of their yes. Okay, so yes can mean, yes, I heard you. Yes, I understood you. Yes, I agree with you. Yes, I heard you, understood you, and agree with you, and that's what I'm going to do. Or even, yes, I heard you, understood you, and agree with you, but I can't do that.
Okay.
So when Israelis hear yes,
but yes.
who are yes. Okay. But when Israelis hear yes, they assume, okay, deal is done. Okay, he said yes, he's going to do it, and then he doesn't do it. Okay, the Israelis say, אבל הוא שקרן, לא? הוא אמר כן. Okay, he said yes, but a yes that you didn't understand. Israelis, on the other hand, are totally direct speakers. So when we speak to other cultures, say that we're communicating with the Chinese or the Japanese or the Indians or even the Americans, okay? Sometimes we're so direct and so low context. You know, context means body language, tone of voice, understanding who you are talking to. Is that person in a higher hierarchy than you or in a low? Israelis talk to everyone exactly the same. Okay, so it's sometimes when we are speaking to other cultures, we are in fact punching them in their face. We are being so direct because we have no context to our speech. We just talk, and we talk exactly the same to everybody, and it comes across as being rude, aggressive, hurtful, etc., etc., and it causes huge misunderstandings.
אז היום אם אני מסתכלת מזווית המבט שלנו, שמה שאנחנו עושים בסדנאות משחק שלנו, זה מדברים בעיקר על מערכות היחסים שאנחנו מייצרים, ואיך אני מתקשר, ואם אני מבין את המינופים. אז כמה מקום יש לעבודה הבין אישית, או מה שנקרא המיומנויות הרכות, בתוך ההבדל הבין תרבותי הזה, כמה באמת מקום נותנים לזה, או שבעיקר אני צריכה קודם לדבר את הארדקור, את המהות של התרבות שלהם, ואז אולי אני אוכל להיכנס עם מיומנויות רכות.
Okay. I think, you know, after being in this profession for 25 years in Israel, people often ask us, so what have you achieved in the 25 years that you've been working in the Israeli market? And I think the greatest answer to that is we have made many of the Israeli companies understand that this is not nice to have. It's need to have. And the minute you can show Israelis how it affects your pocket, how you can lose a customer, insult a customer, not get a particular project because of cultural issues, soft skills. The minute you can make them understand that, then they realize that these skills are as important to have as the soft skills. Because it's all very well that technically somebody is brilliant, but if he or she is causing misunderstandings, conflict, a lack of relationship with other cultures because of their behavior, it doesn't matter how brilliant he is, okay? If he's going to lose projects for you or he's going to insult the culture. We had very recently, okay, a customer who had on the spot fired an Israeli who went on relocation to China. The Chinese customer said, we don't like the way he talks to us. We don't like the way he dresses for meetings. We don't like the way this. We want him off the job. Within 48 hours, they had to find somebody who was prepared to go over there on relocation within 48 hours. Okay. So the minute people understand that sort of thing, they understand just how important this kind of training is. But you know, it's not just teaching Israelis about Americans, because we do lots of different types of training. Another example is, for example, we teach people who have to manage global teams. Okay, they can be sitting in China or in India or in Italy, but they have to manage teams of people all around the world. Okay, how to manage people who don't work from the same assumptions as you do, who have a totally different culture to you. How do you manage all these different cultures? It's terribly, terribly complex.
מאוד, והיום המון חברות בעצם יושבות במקום אחד, אבל יש להם אנשים מעוד 5-6 מדינות אחרות. איך משתלטים על הדבר הזה?
Absolutely. But you know, Rovita, one of the things we always like to tell our customers is that we don't come from the OD perspective. We don't come from the HR perspective. We come purely from the cultural perspective. So, for example, if we do team training, we don't teach people how to build the team. We don't teach people, you know, what are the best people to choose for the team. That we leave to the experts who are the OD people, they're the HR people. We teach people once you have a team in place and they are all over the world. How then do you teach them to build relationships with each other? Do you teach them to build trust? You know, the whole concept of trust. What builds trust for an Israeli and what builds trust for an American and what builds trust for a Chinese is totally, totally different. So
זה ממש מרתק.
It is.
באחת השיחות שלנו סיפרת לי גם על המגמות שיש היום בסין ועל הנכונות שלהם להפוך ב10 שנים הקרובות להיות מעצמת הפיתוח והמחקר הגדולה בעולם, נכון? איך את רואה בעצם, מה את רואה בשטח שקורה?
I've got beautiful. You know, one of the advantages of traveling so much is that you get a very wide perspective of what is going on in the world. And when we travel to the States to train or we travel to Europe to train, you can actually see that the United States and Europe and Europeans are in kind of a downward motion. You go to India and China, they're in an upward motion. They are going to be the people who are going to control the world economy. And it's already happened. You know, there's a very famous expert on China. It would be great for people to listen to his talk. His name is Jacques Martin, and you can find him on the TED Talks. He's one of the world's experts on China. And he predicted that by the year 2020, China would have a bigger economy than the United States. It's already happened. In the year 2014, the Chinese economy hit for the first time, it became bigger than the United States. So we in the Western world have to prepare ourselves that within the next couple of years, if things remain the way they are, that China is going to lead the world economy, not the United States. And a perfect example of this is we have a customer that's actually an American company, but they have 14 sites in China, and they're now building their 15th site in China, in one of the provinces, not in Beijing or Shanghai, but in one of the provinces. They are looking for 6,000 engineers for one site.
Wow.
So one of the biggest difficulties, Ravitol, that Israelis have is they have a difficulty in thinking big, okay? Israel is a tiny country with a tiny population. It's one of the reasons that Israelis make so many exits. They build the product, they design the product or the service or the program or whatever it is, platform. And then exactly, because they don't know how do we take this to the rest of the world. And then they sell to a company that knows how to do that. So one of the things that we need to explain to Israelis is, guys, you are thinking tiny, you are thinking Israel, you're not thinking global. So when we go to China and we go to America and places like that, we say to them, so what are the problems that you have working with Israelis? One of the biggest, and the first they say, is scalability. Israelis understand small. They don't understand huge.
שזה מדהים, כי אנחנו נתפסים באלה שיש להם את המוחות היצירתיים, החדשנים, המצוינים, הסטארט-אפ ניישן בעצם, נתפסים כחשיבה כזאת, אבל זאת אומרת, בסוף שאנחנו יוצאים החוצה לעולם הגדול, אנחנו צריכים מישהו שיקח את זה צעד אחד קדימה.
Okay. It's a great example. But, Ravitol, that's what globalization is about. Globalization is about taking the best from each culture, the best practices of each culture, and putting them together in order. So the Americans are amazing at sales and marketing. We are amazing at innovation. So instead of saying the Americans are square, they don't think out of the box, think of what the Americans do fantastically that you don't do, okay? And say, wow, they're great at sales and marketing, we're wonderful at the innovation. Let's join forces and let them do what they do fantastically, we'll do what we do fantastically, and then you've got a strong, healthy, real global company.
ואז נוסיף את הייצור והפיתוח והמחקר שעושים, אז יש לנו חברה מנצחת.
זהו.
או זה מתחבר לי מעולה דרך כלל מה שאנחנו עושים, כי אנחנו אומרים איך ניקח מכל אחד את החוזקה שלו, ונשלב את זה ביחד בשביל לתת את התוצאה הכי טובה שיכול להיות.
And that's what it's all about.
מדהים.
Because, you know, if you look at the Bloomberg Innovation Index, the one for 2014, they basically break down innovation into 7 or 8 different areas. If you look at the R&D part, Israel is number 1 in the world. But if you look at the production, we're number 25. And if you look at the manufacturing, we're number 60. Okay? So we're great at some things, we're not great at other things. Why don't we look, okay, to find the best practices of other cultures and put them all together? That's the whole idea.
מדהים. מקסים. מקסים. אני חייבת לשאול אותך עכשיו שאלה אישית, שאני בטוחה שהרבה מהמאזינים שלנו שהם בעלי עסקים, איך אחרי כל כך הרבה שנים שעבדת באמדוקס ועשית עבודה טובה איך עושים את הצעד הזה של להגיד, אוקיי, יש לי את הבשורה שלי, את השליחות שלי אולי, ואיך יוצאים ומקימים עסק עצמאי. למרות שזה היה לפני 12-13 שנה, אבל איך עושים, מאיפה לוקחים את הכוחות האלה של להגיד, אוקיי, יש לי משהו מיוחד ואני הולכת איתו עד הסוף.
Okay, it's a great question and it's a very, very difficult question. But how did I decide to do it? I worked at Amdocs, as I said, for 12 years, and my husband is really the business person in the family, and he was begging me for years to leave Amdocs, be my own boss, etc., etc., and it's very, very frightening. One of the lucky things that I had was a huge amount of passion, okay, which I think 25 years later, I still have. Okay. Belief that what you have got to offer, other people need. So you've got to have that passion, you've got to have that belief in that in yourself. But I was very, very lucky because Amdocs became my biggest customer, but from the outside. Because when I left, they closed the department because they said, basically, you have all the knowledge. So we will employ you as an outside vendor. So I left Amdocs knowing that I had at least one customer. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But you know, Rouitel, the Israeli market is tiny. And everything is through reputation, forumim, etc. If you are good and people by word of mouth are spreading the fact that you are good, okay, you will be able to. If you were talking about the States, or if you were talking about a huge company like China, or etc., then the competition is so great that most people will stick in their jobs. But Israel is different, okay? It's a tiny market, yachasית. If you're good, people will start to know that you're good. Because that's how we find out about each other. We talk about it. We pass on recommendations. We pass on, we had a sadna and it was great and really you should consider it on the forum, etc. And slowly you build yourself up. Or if you have a unique product like you have, okay? And you guys have got such a unique product that you don't need the same kind of people spreading the word because it's an absolutely unique product, and if it works for one, for sure it's going to work for others.
וואו, תודה רבה. אני מאוד נהניתי. אני בטוחה שיכולנו לדבר עוד שעות.
ממש.
באמת כיף, וזו עבודה מרתקת. ואני גם יודעת שנעשה דברים מדליקים ביחד בעתיד, כי באמת יש לנו תשוקה גדולה להגיע למחוזות חדשים. אנחנו כמובן נשאיר כאן את הפרטים של איך למצוא אתכם ואיך ליצור איתכם קשר.
תודה.
ובאמת תודה.
Thank you so much, רויטל. Thank you. תודה רבה.